walk behavior correlations in Utah. It's no secret that we drive in Utah. And in a lot of ways, it makes sense. We are the West. We have a lot of open space to develop and to work with. We have a lot of open space to develop and lots of natural destinations. We also have a lot of employment opportunities all over the valley. And we're really good at building highways. We have one of the most efficient highway systems in the nation. But we're also 15 years into developing an integrated and highly functioning transit system. And we're also growing. So this brings us to a pretty critical tipping point where the region is running out of developed land, and with a lack of greenfield development, we can develop to far-flung spaces, which increases sprawl and time spent in traffic, or we can fill in the spaces that are enabled, which enables and is enabled by diverse transportation options. So in order to avoid spending all of our time stuck in traffic, we wanted to answer, how do we switch our current regional travel patterns from 90% of all trips made by car to a situation with a more diverse mode split, and maybe even pedestrian trips taking the cake. The benefits of pedestrian travel are many. We can mitigate auto-related auto emissions. Increased enthusiasm for active transportation gets more people on the streets, which creates more alert drivers and slower speeds. It creates a need for safer facilities. And finally, integrating land use with transportation lessens the demand for auto-centric travel. So the question is, how do we measure these impacts on a larger scale to understand regionally as well as locally what drives the travel decisions of residents? What makes us decide to walk rather than drive? Is it the proximity of the destination? Is it the variety of options we have once we get there? Is it the type of road we have to travel down to get there? Or does the built environment have nothing to do with our decision-making process, and it all comes down to the kind of person that we are? So we applied principles that are proven to be true in dense areas such as San Francisco and New York to Utah-specific data using the 2012 Utah Household Travel Survey. We took a macro look at correlations between land use and transportation rather than micro, which has been done in other parts, also in Utah, looking at things like urban design. So we took a broader look at this and a regional scope. So our research questions were the factors that influence walk trip making decisions, the length of walk trips, and the frequency of walk trips. Now we looked at the literature, which grouped the factors into four main categories: the built environment, natural features, household characteristics, and perceptions and attitudes. And I'm going to go through these really quickly. The built environment is mostly grouped into the Ds. We focused on three of them: design, diversity, and density. Design being street connectivity and block size, sidewalk and bike lane infrastructure. Diversity looks at the land use mix and the job housing mix. Density is related to population and employment density in certain radius. The natural environment looks at topography and weather patterns and climate. Household characteristics are also found to attribute to trip-making decisions, so things like income, number of non-working adults, number of school-aged children, household size. Perceptions and attitudes are also believed to influence travel-making decisions, but these were left out of the analysis due to the limit in our data sample. So really quickly, to go through the methodology. As mentioned, we used the 2012 Utah Household Travel Survey, and we grouped trips into walk versus non-walk. We used an ordinary least squares and a zero inflation model. Zero inflation model was used to account for the over-dispersion of zeros in our model, so this mitigates the over-dispersion. So what did we find? We looked at three analyses: walk versus non-walk, walk trip frequency, and walk trip distance. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to talk about the findings of walk versus non-walk. So these are our findings. So you can see on the left-hand side is more of the household characteristics, and on the right-hand side is factors related to the built environment. The bars on top show factors that influence walk trip making, and the bars on bottom look at non-walk trips. So we can see that that jobs housing balance, so that gets to the density as well as the mix of uses, as well as street connectivity positively influence somebody's decisions to make walk trips. Also, vehicle ownership was the largest and single deterrent from making walk trips. So I'm going to give a synopsis of the findings up here, but also to pose a question to the group. So given these findings, understanding that a well-connected neighborhood with a variety of destinations increases walk trips, measures of the built environment are trip distance determinants, and also vehicle ownership is the single largest deterrent for making a walk trip. So how do we enable people to live without a car? And how do we avoid subsidizing the cost of driving? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Chris Parker with a group called Give. I apologize. I think it was advertised that Paige Pitcher would be here, but she had to leave the country, actually, unexpectedly over the weekend. So I'll try to fractionally do as well as she would. I'll understand if napping commences. It's a new urbanist kind of conference. I thought we'd talk a little bit about urban sprawl. That's the thing to do. More specifically, though, rather than kind of a hypothetical, is it good or is it bad? I thought about maybe talking about some practical ways of battling it. Ideally, you'd go ahead and have one that's waived and have an urban growth boundary pop up overnight, and you'd have a freeway that would shrink, and you would have a lot of factors that would go ahead in Utah to reduce urban sprawl. But the reality of Utah itself politically is that that's very unlikely to happen. We seem to annually have an expansion of our transit system. And really the battle over kind of the urban growth boundary would take place in places like Riverton or Riverdale. It wouldn't take place in Salt Lake City. And so politically, these probably aren't going to happen. They're worth fighting for. We absolutely should. But I thought I'd focus on a couple things that you could do to combat this that we actually do have control over. And one of the main ways to do that is to make our urban environment so compelling that no one wants to live apart from it. Most people think of downtown when that's brought up, but the reality is that most people don't want to live downtown. It's $2 to $3 a foot to rent in downtown now. They just had a parcel on South Temple sell for $80 a foot just for bare ground. You cannot afford, if you're not relatively well off, to live there increasingly. And B, there's a lot of kind of outdoor amenities that aren't accessible for downtown. So increasingly what we're going to have to do is take our kind of peripheral urban environments that maybe are not desirable right now and make them better, which is a little bit of what Give does. So I thought I'd talk about a test study real quick that we piloted 4 years ago in East Central Ogden. East Central Ogden at the time had the lowest property values in urban Utah. You could buy a 3-bedroom home for $60,000 to $80,000 in 2011 pretty regularly. And so it was kind of a fun place to go ahead and prove out a couple ideas that we had. So we launched the Imagine Jefferson project in East Central Ogden. And this is what's happened to median sales prices. Now, if you were trying to prove something, you can probably guess when Imagine Jefferson opened its doors. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be showing you a graph because it wouldn't have worked. But right here in first quarter 2014, this is a 3-year synopsis of a halo area around Imagine Jefferson, 1 block in every direction surrounding the project. You'll notice a spike. Property values basically were kind of rolling through third quarter 2013, and then something happened, among other things, in this little community. Property values basically went up 120%, with very little changing, but one of these projects. So we'll talk a little bit about that project. There's a couple before and after shots of Imagine Jefferson. We took a building that was 6 years vacant. It had been advertised extensively during that time, but no one could figure out anything to do. Went ahead and threw the parking underground, put some ground floor retail in, residential on the top, and started reusing the building. Took a lot of kind of the missing teeth in the community, replaced them with, that's actually a triplex designed to look like kind of like an old Foursquare style mansion. And we started utilizing some of the eyesores in different ways on this. The interiors are similar. I mean, these are places where you would want to live. And so it's not surprising, it's having a positive increase in the community. Here's a little bit of the stats. Apart from the residential aspect, you really can't change a brand of an area very well with residential. No one gets to brag about living next 3 doors down from that apartment complex, or I live 3 blocks from that cool house. But you put up a couple of funky streetlights on 9th and 9th in a coffee shop, and everybody in a mile says they live on 9th and 9th now. And so it has residential components for sure, but you're also able to go ahead and have some of that ground floor retail, some art space, some overall community space. Now, everything I've said is probably unsurprising that it would have a catalytic effect on this community. What I haven't said, and what I'd like to focus on for the next 4 minutes, is what this project actually is, because I feel like we look for tools to go ahead and wave a wand over things, and we overlook tools that are right there, that are easily usable, that are also more ethically usable and kind of catalyzing change. So this project is 85% affordable housing, and had this outsized impact on surrounding home prices. So this sort of binary system of you can either have gentrification, which displaces everyone, or you can have or you can have what you have now, which is an area that's hasn't had an unsubsidized housing start in 40 years prior to this, is kind of a misnomer. And I feel like people don't utilize a very large subset of funding that happens every year in good cycles and bad cycles, and pencils during any environment and in any community. And so by using affordable housing as the kind of tip of the spear to go ahead and change the feel of the neighborhood, you can really achieve some interesting results. Those results are also one of the better ways you could do this. First is they're responsible. I mean, people don't mind gentrification because areas get nicer, they mind it because people get kicked out. And the idea of the gentry replacing affordable residents is one of the more pernicious in development. This Imagine Jefferson project, and then the North 6 project, which we're looking at right here, Imagine Jefferson project added 50 units of affordable housing out of 59 units of affordable housing, and displaced less than that. So we actually have more affordable housing even with rising property values. So it's an ethical way to go ahead and do this. It's doable in that you do have constant stream every year. You will have roughly about $75 million available for this use day in, day out. So it's a process that you don't have to wait for, you don't have to wish for. It's a tool that is there that just isn't being used for catalytic new urbanism right now. And thirdly, it's aligned. Ironically, if you're putting out a market rate product, you have to justify every single dollar that you spend. If I spend $1 on an urban mural or something like that, I really have to justify getting an extra $1 in rent for that, or my investors are going to shoot me down. But with affordable housing projects, you actually have a band of money that you can make. And so getting an affordable housing developer to go ahead and do something like ground floor retail or some sort of community feature is actually easier because they don't have the heavy economic incentive not to do so. If you're a 30% market rate project like this and 70% affordable, if I want to build something cool, I only have to pay 30 cents on the dollar for that sort of catalytic social impact. And so it actually is much easier to build great affordable projects, ironically, than it is to build great market projects. So in closing, as you're thinking about concrete ways of revitalizing communities, or just how do we get a developer that will actually put active use on the bottom floor, I think really look at affordable being not just something that you do because you have to, but you do because it's one of the best ways to catalyze a community in the early goings. Thanks.
I want to talk about the reason for this is that in the past, if you needed a cross-section, you'd hire an architect, but that was slow, expensive, and might lack buy-in because you don't get a chance to communicate with people. Or you can do it yourself. That's also slow. It's hard to track what's going on in a spreadsheet, and it's a little hard to visualize. So the usual suspects got together, and they decided to hire Metro Analytics to build this thing. And I think it's because they knew I would spend more money on it than they would. So that's where the genesis of this came around. So we'll jump right in now and show you some of how it works. So this is me running it, and I'll show you what it's doing. So first I'm changing backgrounds in the scenery, just so that you can get the look and feel that you want there. You can right-click on any tile and change it, add new ones, change the trees. I'm zooming in right here. And so that all of the graphics are high resolution, so you can print them out on plotter-sized images or zoom in and just really. This is intended for public meetings so that you can engage people in what it is that they really want to have. So that was switching from color buildings to shadow buildings so that you can focus on the street and not the buildings, or vice versa. There's a little button on the side that lets you change the height of the buildings if that's part of the discussion of what do you really want to allow or encourage. I'm going to change right here the biker. So instead of being on-street bike lane, maybe you want to make it a little more protected and integrated with the pedestrian realm. Down low like that, it would be hard for snow plowing, so I've got a raised pavement thing that'll raise it up. It's switching it here, so it's not a one-way, but it's a two-way bike lane, putting in like that. And maybe that's tied at 6 feet, so it's raising it up to 8 feet. All of this is keeping track of my right-of-way and how much I've used. Changing the transit over here now to light rail. So over on the markings, I've got light rail tracks, one like that, and another one that's more appropriate for pavement, so that you can kind of convey the message of what it is exactly that you're trying to do. And the red mark over there on the side, well, okay, aerial footprint builder, that's the next thing. So, so this is a street in Bountiful, 66 foot wide, and what I've done is taken one of those streets I designed, those cross sections, and I'm going to lay it down on top of the aerial photo now so that you can see what it gets. So I'm going to start building. I'm going with the right edge as kind of my defining edge. Every time I click, it drops a point down, and it'll draw the street in just a minute. It's just lines. You'll see it. Here it comes, done. And pops out the street like that. So now each one of those lines is an accurate width and tells what it is. I can switch between the alternatives that I have so I see what the effect is on the street. This is kind of a Google Earth-based plug-in to any web browser. Down here are some labels that you scroll across them at the beginning and it'll tell you what it is and how wide it is. Click on that little tree icon, it pops up a little image of what the street cross-section is. So this can be web-based, anybody can go there, any resident or whatever, if you decide to make it available, can go in and see exactly what you have intended. Edges only is a way to hide the middle stuff and just see what is the right-of-way impact. So this is a 100-foot right-of-way that I designed on a 66-foot existing. So it says, whoa, if you really do that, you're going to hit a whole bunch of stuff. Here's what's coming really soon under development. This gear tool up on the left, it pops up a kind of a control center thing. It has instructions, quick start, how to do everything that there is in here. So I'm going to click changing tiles. This shows you how to work the tool basically, and all those little topics are showing how to work the tool. So go back. Okay, next I think it's going to go to future features. So here's some of the things. So an economic analysis is one of the things it can do in the future. Walkability score, so you can see just how walkable it is. Enclosure score, that's what I meant, not a walkability score. So then it has a login tab and an inputs. This is where you will, it has red light, green light, to tell you whether what you're planning is consistent with good design. And so hovering over this, it shows the different contexts. So it says, what have you got right now? You select one of those. Then on the next one, it'll have future conditions. What do you want to have? And you select one of those. And then with those kind of inputs, we can go to ITE's walkable design criteria, and it'll help you know that. So this also takes kind of the grid. It says, what kind of grid do you actually have now? What kind of grid do you think you can achieve in the future? And then that helps it use its analytics to tell you whether the design that you're creating is going to work well or not. This is how you log in, so you just go type your email in, presuming you've already registered before. And you can create unlimited projects right now. And so Great Streets is one of the projects that I made. This is the 2014 APA Great Streets Awards. So they have 10 streets across the country that won awards that year. So I went ahead and designed all 10 of those streets in street plan. And this is Broadway in New York City. It's 14 miles long, so it's not always like this, but this is pretty typical of the way it is. And those trees, they look like they're bunched together, but they're offset actually. And here's 25th Street in Ogden was one of the award winners as well. And this is what the Ogden street looks like. It's got parallel parking, or not parallel, it's got angle parking on both sides. It's got bulb outs and other things that are easier to see from the aerial shot, but cross-section wise, that's what it looks like. And it's a 100-foot right-of-way. So it's designing walkable urban thoroughfares. This is the main document behind what drives the intelligence of street plan. It's got tons of tables in it, very hard to understand if you're a regular human. So what we've done is tried to take those recommendations, pull them into street plan, so it's just doing it behind the scenes. These are some of the users in Utah that have registered and started using it. This is people outside, companies and people outside of Utah who happen to find it somehow, have not tried to advertise it anywhere outside of Utah yet, waiting to, until it works really well to do that. So that's it. So you can go and use it right now. It's free. All you got to do is register at streetplan.net.
And I'm also a resident of Sugar House, and I'm a pedestrian, and I own a kickstand bike, or a bike with a kickstand, right? So that means you're not going to see me in a spandex, and you're just going to see me around the neighborhood on my bike, checking things out and trying to be comfortable on the bike and encourage other people to do that. And John said, what's your passions? So I decided to talk about my passions in the built environment and the urban environment. This is not a first career for me. I came through it through all my work in my community. It sparked such an interest in me that I went to school for a planning degree not too long ago. And so these are some things that are passionate for me that I also have some takeaways for all of you of things to think about when creating communities. For a number of years, over a decade, I was the developer liaison in Sugar House. So we were determined to be an RDA district in 1986, and I think it wasn't until 1996 that our first project really rolled. And so from that point forward, through kind of that first kind of blush of Sugar House redevelopment, I was negotiating with the developers, with the city, and with the community. So I tried to help everybody learn language that would help each other communicate better. So help the residents learn about building, urban environment type of terminology, planning terminology, and then work with the businesses, because there was an economic development cycle that was much faster for them than the local community. So I spend a lot of time trying to get the two to kind of come somewhere in the middle. And we had some failures and we have some successes, and I'm sure you'd all love to tell me about your favorite parts in Sugar House, right? Because there are some things in there that are, that would be kind of a fun thing to write about. So that was really a lot of fun for me, and I enjoyed the teaching part of it. And I think that that's the takeaway from that point in my life, is that how important it is to embrace the people that come with the clipboards and are wearing the sneakers. Because I was one of those people in the beginning. It's like, help me understand, what do you mean by? So helping residents and having residents at the table with projects, I think makes a huge difference, and I think that's a very important thing to do. And if I could figure out some way to get paid to do that, I would work in local communities and help them work with developers and help them work through the city processes, so that people don't go, really, that's what we approve, you know? So it's kind of a struggle for all parties when you have to come to the community and the city together. My other favorite thing, and I think I tell everybody I know this, is public art. And I have had the pleasure of serving on the Salt Lake City Arts Council, and then I'm also on the Salt Lake City Design Board, and we choose public art pieces for public buildings, buildings that are publicly funded through CIP money, capital improvement money, or CDBG, Community Development Block Grant money. And that's really a lot of fun. We've just completed the selections for the new Utah Performing Arts Center. And we're working on Regent Street right now, which is a nice big budget, which is great. But many times you'll see public art showing up in parks, in community centers. So one thing, the takeaway there is, you know, public art is a way to start a discussion with the community. And it also, for me personally, is a social justice issue. And so people who may not be able to go to a great museum or see great works of art like all of us, this is an opportunity for them to be able to see work done by an artist, and then we also have a very strong ethic to pay the artist for the work. So I think that's an important piece. And of course, as you know, it provides texture to the environment. So as a pedestrian, there's something to look at as you're walking by. So I think public art is very important. You know, and all is, you know, and that, I got started on that by simply making a phone call to Nancy Boskoff, the director of the Utah Arts Council, or the Salt Lake City Arts Council at the time, and I said, I think my community needs public art. I like public art. How can we get that? And we used RDA money for a number of years in Sugar House, and there are small, you might have noticed the fish on the Monument Plaza. There's anagrams in the sidewalk. There's a big sugar beet in Hidden Hollow, as well as in front of the library. So those are all things that provide texture. So every time a development occurs, I always want to say, and I ask the question, where's the public art? And it doesn't have to be publicly funded. It can be on a project funded by the developer. So that's something that can happen, or some other opportunity. Transportation equity, or equity in general, is important to me. And so myself, Rita Lund back there, Rita Wave, and Lynn Olson, we started up the Parley's Trail, the Pratt Coalition, and as many of you know, I hope you've used it, it's an 8-mile non-motorized trail, and it goes from the Bonneville shoreline to the Jordan River Parkway. And our most recent piece is probably, well, it's a bit large piece of public art, but how many of you have gone through the connection in Sugar House Park that opens up the park to the Sugar House Business District and then going up into the residential neighborhoods? Well, here's a surprise. That project started as a National Endowment for the Arts project. It was a call for projects that were public works that could also be a piece of public art. So that actually functions as a drainage amenity for the Parley's Creek. So, and for that pond in Sugar House Park. So go and look at it. Plantings have just been done. Shock Creek has been put on, so you can give the walls of the canyon. There's a hoodoo there. And that was designed by a very famous environmental artist, Patricia Johansson. And we, that was a whole process where we went out and applied for that grant from the National Endowment. We made the cuts. We hired Patricia through a competitive process. And the trail was funded by congressional earmarks back in the day when those still were a popular way of getting money. And I'll still remember the day when my neighbor came over and I was raking the lawn, and he said to me, "You got $10.5 million. And I just kind of thought he was joking. But it was a great day and a great time, as Rita knows. Another thing, open space is very important to me. So in 2003, I chaired the bond to have a fund to purchase open space in Salt Lake City. And I think that fund is just about depleted, and I'm pushing. How can we replace that money, right? And then I'm very involved with the S-Line, trying to make that kind of a beautiful corridor, because I kind of fancy myself a curator of open spaces. So trying to make that corridor work not only from an aesthetic standpoint, but also help people in Sugar House age in place so that people don't have to be institutionalized because they are away from a transportation source and then don't have access to a network to get places. So that's important. So always think about connectivity and accessibility in projects. And where is the open space, you know, in the developments? Where is it? Where does the earth get to breathe? Because humans need that psychological piece as well. So no PowerPoint, but there you go.